Elias Hale rode 40 miles to the Territorial Stockmen's bank with his father's watch in his pocket. He meant to pawn it. Silver case, worn thin at the hinge, still keeping time. He was told a watch wasn't a wife. He didn't argue. He took the watch back off the counter and set it in his vest, over his heart, where it had ridden the whole long way down. The loan officer was a soft-handed man named Rufus Crandall. There were 8 ranchers in that lobby, hats in their hands, and Crandall spoke so all of them could hear. The bank doesn't carry a bachelor and a prayer. Mr. Hale policy needs a married man on the note. Bring me a wife by the fall roundup. Or bring me the keys. The file was already open on the desk. Elias could see the top of it. Someone had stamped it in red. Single, decline. The ink was dry. The decision had been made before he ever walked in the door. He rode home the long way, past a fence that wasn't his. It belonged to the widow Della Vance. She was in her yard with a bucket, and she lifted her head as he passed, and he slowed his horse without meaning to. There was one woman in the whole valley who owed the bank nothing. And there was one thing on her land the bank would kill to own. He didn't know that yet. If you believe love is built with 2 pairs of hands, this story is for you. And if it is, if you've ever put your whole back into something and asked for nothing but a fair shake, then do this old channel a kindness. Tap subscribe so these stories keep finding you. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. I like to know where the fire's lit. Now, let me take you back. Sweetgrass Bend, Montana Territory. The year was 1884. Elias Hale's father had been a year in the ground. A hard year. The kind that doesn't soften with the seasons, but just settles, like a stone working its way down through cold mud, deeper every time it rains. The old man had come out to that bench of land with 2 mules and a bad cough and a stubbornness that outlived them all. He'd carved a ranch out of sagebrush and wind. He'd dug the well by hand. He'd strung the first fence, mile by aching mile, and he'd told his son more than once, with dirt under both their nails, a man's word to his own land is the only note that never comes due wrong. You keep it. You hear me. You keep it. Elias heard him. Elias kept it. Dawn to dark, dark to dawn, he kept it. But the drought didn't care about a promise to a dead man. 2 summers running, the grass came up short and went brown by July. The creek that fed the low pasture dropped to a trickle and then to a bed of dry stones. He'd sold off cattle he couldn't feed. Watched them go down the road behind another man's horse. Good stock, his father's stock, gone for a price that shamed the buyer more than him. And there was the note. $840. His father had borrowed it against the ranch the last winter of his life to buy hay when the snow came early. He'd meant to pay it back with the spring calves. He died before the spring calves came. $840, due in full at the fall roundup. 60 days out. Elias had counted them twice, sitting at the kitchen table with a stub of pencil, and the number didn't move for the counting. 60 days. He had maybe half the sum if he sold down to the bone and ate beans till winter. The other half he did not have. And the bank would not lend it to a man alone. He was 34 years old. He had a good back and honest hands and a name in that valley that no one had ever spoken sideways. And none of it was enough, because he had no wife, and the policy was the policy, and the policy did not bend for a good back. That was the thing that ate at him, riding home. Not the money. He'd have found the money somehow, worked it out of the ground with his teeth. It was the way Crandall had said it. Bachelor and a prayer. Like a man's whole life was a shortfall on a ledger. Like being on your own was a failing you'd chosen. He would not beg. His father had never begged a soul, and Elias would eat the same dry pride to the last mouthful before he'd hold his hat out. But pride doesn't pay a note. The Vance homestead sat next to his. sharing a fence along the western line. A neat place. Neater than his, if he was honest, and he tried to be. The barn door hung true. The garden ran in straight rows, staked and weeded. There was a woman living there alone, who did the work of 2 hired men and a foreman besides, and the town called it a pity. Cordelia Vance. Della, to the few who'd earned it. She was 31, and she'd been a widow 2 years. Her husband had been a quiet man named Robert, a surveyor by trade before he turned his hand to the land, and he'd gone through the ice on the river one February crossing that should have held. They pulled him out too late. And the town waited, the way towns do, for the widow to sell up and go back east to whatever people she'd come from. She didn't go. She put on her husband's coat, took up his tools, and ran the place herself. Second winter, she brought a heifer through a breach calving on her kitchen floor at 2 a.m, alone, both arms in to the shoulder, and saved the cow and the calf both. The story got around. It changed the pity to something else. Not respect, exactly. Towns are slow with that. But a kind of wary wonder, the way you'd watch a woman walk a roof beam and not fall. She owed no one. That was the plain fact of her. Robert had left the homestead clear, no note, no lien, nothing hanging over it, and she'd kept it clear by never once reaching for what she couldn't pay for. She bought what she had cash for and did without the rest. The bank had no hook in her at all. There'd been a man who wanted one. August Marrow. The cattle baron whose spread ran along the whole south end of the bench, a rich man with a rich man's easy walk, who'd come calling on the widow within a year of Robert's death. He'd brought her a matched team of greys as a courting gift. She'd sent the greys back the same afternoon with a boy and a note that no one ever saw. And Marrow had ridden off the Vance place with his jaw set hard, and he had not come back. The town said she was a fool to refuse him. All that money, all that land. A widow ought to be grateful. Della Vance had never once looked grateful in her life. She looked like a woman doing her own arithmetic and coming out even. Elias knew her the way neighbors know each other on land that empty. A wave across the fence, a borrowed tool returned clean, a hand at branding when the seasons crossed. He knew she was fair, and he knew she was proud, and he knew she'd never taken a thing off him she couldn't give back. He didn't know what to do about Crandall. And so, 2 days after the bank, he saddled up and rode the mile of shared fence to ask the one person in the valley who might see it clear. She met him at the gate with flour on her hands. She'd been baking. There was a smudge of it on her jaw, and a strand of dark hair come loose from the twist at the back of her neck, and she looked at him with green eyes that missed very little. "Elias Hale," she said. "You've got a bank face on you." "I've got a bank problem," he said. She wiped her hands on her apron and stood back from the gate. "Then you'd better have coffee about it. Come in before it boils over." Her kitchen was clean and spare and warm. A tin of coffee, a table-scrubbed pail, a window over the basin that looked out on the garden and, past it, on the low green line of the bench where the grass still held. Her water held, he noticed. Even now. Even in the drought. The garden was green as May. She poured 2 cups and sat across from him and waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the things about her. So he told her. The watch, and the counter, and the 8:40 due in 60 days, and Crandall's red stamp, and the policy that needed a married man. He told it plain, without dressing it up and without cutting it short, and she listened with her hands around her cup, and she didn't say a soft, useless thing, which he was grateful for. "Crandall," she said when he was done. Just the name, like she was setting it on the table to look at. "You know him." "I know the shape of him." She turned her cup a slow quarter. "My Robert dealt with that bank once or twice. Came home tighter each time." She looked at the window. "There's only the one bank in reach of here. Crandall knows it. A man with the only water in a dry year charges what he pleases, and Crandall's water is money. He said policy. Policy's a fine word for a locked door. She drank. It sounds like the rule made you do it, instead of a man choosing to. That landed somewhere in him and stayed. He'd felt exactly that in the lobby and hadn't had the words. She'd handed them to him across a kitchen table without trying. They talked it around a while. She asked good questions. What was the ranch worth clear, what the calves would bring? Whether Crandall could be gone around to a bank in the next county, and Elias said 40 miles the wrong way with the roundup coming. And she nodded, because she knew the country and the calendar both. And then, because the talk had wandered the way talk does between people at ease, she said a thing she thought was nothing. She was telling him how Robert had been careful. A surveyor's care, she said, everything recorded, everything filed. He put things in order the way another man breathes. Every corner of this place is marked and papered somewhere. She smiled. A small, tired, fond thing, remembering him. He even took the spring and recorded the deed to it in my own name, separate from the homestead, said a woman ought to hold the water in her own hand and not have to ask a man for a drink. She shook her head at the memory. I never think about it. Water's water. It comes up out of the ground whether it's papered or not. She said it and moved on to whether Elias had tried the freight company for a short loan, and he answered, and the moment closed over like water over a dropped stone, and neither of them marked it. The spring on the bench. The only year-round water for miles that fed her land and fed the low corner of his through the shared fence, and would have fed August Marrow's whole thirsty south range if he could ever have laid a hand to it. Recorded, separate, in the widow's own name. She never thought about it. He didn't either. Not then. He rode home in the last of the light with nothing solved and something turning over slow in the back of his mind. It took him 2 days to turn it all the way over, and when it came up ugly, and he hated it, and it wouldn't leave him. There was a way. A cold way. A married man could carry the note. And here, a mile down his own fence, was a woman the bank had no hold on, who owed no one, who was as alone in her work as he was in his. It wasn't a courtship he was thinking of. He wanted to be honest with himself about that much. It was a transaction. And he thought, riding his line the third morning, that maybe she was the one soul in the valley he could put such a thing to, plainly, without either of them having to pretend it was more than it was, because she did her own arithmetic, because she'd know a fair deal when she saw one, and say no to a poor one without weeping. He put on his one good shirt. He rode the mile again. She was in the barn, forking hay, and she came out into the yard with straw on her sleeves and read his face and said, "That's a worse face than the bank face. I've got a thing to ask you," he said, "and I need you to let me say all of it before you answer. It's going to sound like an insult partway through. It isn't meant as one." She set the fork against the barn wall. She folded her arms. "Say it then," so he said it. And he made himself say it as a deal, because a deal was the only honest name for it. The bank won't carry me alone. It'll carry a married man. You're the one person I know who owes them nothing and does her own thinking. He held her eyes. "I'm asking you to marry me on paper. Your name on the note beside mine, so the bank's satisfied. In return, I pay you a set sum, cash, and I put your homestead right, the barn roof, the fences, the pump that sticks, whatever you name, and we both sign a private paper the same day, an agreement of annulment that dissolves the whole thing clean the minute the note's cleared and paid. No claim on you. No claim on your land. You'd owe me nothing when it's done, and I'd owe you nothing but the thanks." He'd expected her to slap him, or to laugh, or to send him off the way she'd sent Marrow's grays. He'd braced for it. She didn't do any of those. She stood very still in the yard with the straw on her sleeves and her green eyes on him, and something moved behind them and was shut away before he could read it. And she was quiet, a long moment. A paper marriage, she said. A business marriage. Yes. And I'd keep my place. And you'd fix it up. And you'd pay me besides. Yes, and when your note's paid, we tear the whole thing up and go back to a wave over the fence. That's the shape of it. She looked away from him then, out past the garden to the green line of the bench, and he thought he saw her jaw tighten just slightly, the way a person does swallowing something down. When she spoke again, her voice was even. You know what they'll say. The whole town. They'll say the widow bought herself a husband. They'll say the rancher sold himself to save his skin. She looked back at him. You'd wear that. In front of Crandall and all of them. I'd wear worse to keep my father's land, he said. The question is whether you would. You've got nothing to gain from the talk, and I'd not blame you a bit for saying no. And here was the thing he didn't see. The thing she never let him see. That she'd been useful all her life, and never once chosen. That Merrow had wanted her water and her strong back, and had brought her graze like she was a paddock to be stocked. That Robert, God rest him, had loved her, but had needed her more, and she'd told herself for 2 years that being needed was as near to being wanted as a woman in her position had any right to. And here came another good man, with another fair deal, standing in her yard offering her a wage for her name, and it was the most useful anyone had made her feel in a long time, and it cut her clean through, and she would rather have died than let him see it cut. Because the security was real. She did her own arithmetic. A set sum in cash and her homestead put right would carry her through years of dry seasons alone. It was a good deal. It was a fair deal. It just wasn't the one small thing she'd stopped letting herself want. All right, she said. He blinked. All right, I'll marry your paper, Elias Hale. She picked up the fork again. There was something final in the way she took it up. Bring me the annulment agreement to read before I sign a word. I read everything twice. And you'll fix the barn roof first, before the fall rains, because I've been catching that leak in a pot for a year and I'm sick of the sound. She turned back toward the hay. Now go home. A man doesn't loiter in a woman's yard the week before he marries her, business or no. There's talk enough coming. He went home. He should have felt like a man who'd found his way clear. Mostly he did. But there'd been that half a second in the yard, that shutting away behind her eyes, and it followed him down the fence line and would not quite explain itself. They were married on a Thursday, at the courthouse in Sweetgrass Bend, at 10 in the morning, because Elias had to be back to move cattle by afternoon, and Della had said no sense wasting a whole day on paper. The town came anyway. Word travels a valley faster than a horse. By the time they climbed the courthouse steps there were folks along the boardwalk pretending errands, and inside the little room there were faces that had no business there but curiosity, and standing at the back with his soft hands folded over his belt was Rufus Crandall himself, come to see his policy satisfied in the flesh. There was no ring bought. Elias had no money for one and wouldn't have spent it if he had. But his mother's band was in the watch pocket, the plain iron one his father had put on her hand 50 years back when they had nothing, and Elias had carried it down the mountain that morning without quite deciding to. When the justice asked for a token, Elias took it out, and it was warm from riding against him, and it was so plain it was almost nothing, a dark circle of hammered iron worn smooth. He put it on Della's finger. Her hand didn't shake. His did, a little. And he was surprised at that, and covered it by holding her hand a beat too long. The justice read the words. They said the words back. Della's chin was up the whole time, level and steady, and she looked straight ahead at the flag on its pole, and if there was a wetness at the corner of her eye, Elias told himself, it was the cold room. You could hear the whispers. That's the widow. Bought herself a man, did you hear? And him, poor devil, sold cheap to keep his dirt. The word sold went around that room like a draft under a door. Neither of them bent to it. She kept her chin up. He kept his. They were two proud people getting married for money in front of a town that had never once helped either of them, and they stood there and took it, side by side, and there was something in that standing together, though neither would have called it anything, that was already more than a paper said. When it was done, Crandall came forward with the note folded in his coat. He had them sign it right there, on the justice's own table, both names side by side, in ink. And he took out his stamp, and he pressed it down on the file, with a little grunt of satisfaction. Elias saw the word come up in red as Crandall lifted the stamp. Married. Approved. Well now, Crandall said, smiling his soft smile at the both of them. That wasn't so hard, was it, Mr. Hale? Amazing what a man can do when he applies himself. He tipped his hat to Della. Mrs. Hale. My congratulations. The bank does love a family man. Della looked at him with those green eyes that did their own arithmetic. The bank, she said pleasantly, loves a family man's collateral. Good day, Mr. Crandall, and she took her husband's arm, because the town was watching, and it would look right, and they walked out of the courthouse into the hard bright morning as man and wife on paper, and drove the buckboard home in a silence that had a great deal in it, and said none of it aloud. They lived like two courteous strangers in one house. She kept her homestead, that had been the deal, but a married couple couldn't be seen to live a fence apart, so she came to his place with a trunk and a crate and took the small room that had been his father's, and the door between stayed shut. They divided the house without a word about it. Her half and his half. They passed in the kitchen. They said good morning and good night. It was, Elias thought, the loneliest a house had ever been with two people in it, but you can't share a kitchen with someone and not learn them. He learned that she rose before he did, always, no matter how early he set himself to beat her, and had the stove going and the coffee on. He learned she took her tea bitter, no sugar, and one morning he watched her stir it and drink it with a small pinch at the corner of her mouth, and it took him 2 more mornings to understand she took it bitter because sugar was dear, and she'd been doing without so long she'd stopped calling it doing without. The next time he was in town, he bought a twist of sugar out of his own thin money and left it in the tin without a word. She never said anything about it. But the level in the tin went down, slow, and her tea got a little less bitter, and once he caught the smallest ease in her face over the cup, and he looked away quick so she wouldn't catch him catching it. And she learned him. She learned that on the nights the accounts were bad he didn't eat. He'd sit at the table with the ledger and push his plate away half full and think she didn't notice. She noticed everything. She started making the plainer suppers on those nights, the ones a man could eat cold later without shame, and leaving his covered on the back of the stove. And in the morning it would be gone, and neither of them would mention it. The iron band she wore. That had surprised him. He'd half thought she'd take it off in the house, it being only paper. But she wore it. He caught her once at the window turning it slow around her finger with her thumb, staring out at the dark, her face unreadable, and he didn't know what she was thinking, and didn't dare ask. She turned it like a question she hadn't answered yet. It was the lead mare that broke the first ice between them. She was a good bay mare, his best saddle horse, his father's before him, and she took a fever sudden the way horses do. Off her feed by noon, and down in the straw by dark, sides heaving, eye gone dull. Elias knew enough to know it was bad, and not enough to know what to do, and he was standing in the lamplit barn with his heart in his boots, when Della came in behind him in her husband's old coat with her hair down her back. She didn't ask leave. She knelt in the straw and put her hand to the mare's chest and her ear to her side and listened, and she said, "Colic on top of the fever. Get me the linseed oil and the warm water and don't stand there like a post." And he went, and he did what she said, and for the rest of that night the two of them worked over that mare like they'd done it together 100 times. She drenched the horse and walked her when she could stand and knelt with her when she couldn't. She talked to the mare low and steady the whole night, the way she must have talked to her own frightened stock through worse nights alone. Elias held the lamp and held the halter and did the lifting, and somewhere past midnight he stopped thinking of her as the paper wife in the next room and started thinking of her as the surest pair of hands he'd ever worked beside. The fever broke near dawn. The mare heaved a great sigh and lifted her head and reached, weak, for a wisp of hay, and Della sat back on her heels in the straw and let out a breath she must have been holding for hours. "She'll do now," she said. Her voice was worn to nothing. "Della, he didn't have more than her name." "I don't. Thank you doesn't cover it." "Then don't spend it." But there was no sting in it. She was too tired to sharpen. She leaned back against the stall boards, and her eyes fell shut. Just for a moment. And then, a moment longer. And the long night took her, and she slept sitting up in the straw, with her chin dropping toward her chest. Elias looked at her a while in the gray light. The strong hands gone slack in her lap, the line of worry smoothed off her sleeping face. She looked younger asleep, and softer, and terribly alone even there in his own barn a foot from him. He took off his coat, and he laid it over her shoulders, careful, so as not to wake her. She stirred and didn't wake. She pulled it closer in her sleep without knowing whose it was, and settled, and Elias sat down against the other stall to watch the mare, and to watch, he told himself, only the mare. The sugar in the tin. The coat over the shoulders. The plate left warm on the stove. None of it was in the agreement. Neither of them said so. The pressure came the way he'd known it would. It was a fortnight after the wedding that Crandall sent word by a rider that the bank wished to review the terms of the Hale note in light of the changed circumstances. Elias rode in with his stomach in a knot and sat again across that soft-handed man's desk. Crandall was all regret. It was a shame, truly, but the bank's directors had looked again at the drought conditions and the state of the range, and they felt the original terms were, well, generous, given the risk. They'd want to shorten the schedule, bring the maturity forward. Nothing that a diligent married man couldn't meet, of course. And then, Crandall said the thing under the thing. The way he did, smiling, that the bank reserved the right to call the note in full, at once, upon any irregularity in its handling. Any irregularity at all. What kind of irregularity? Elias said. "Oh," said Crandall, spreading his soft hands. "The bank knows it when it sees it, Mr. Hale, best, just to keep everything very tidy. Very much above board. You've a wife to help you keep the books tidy now, haven't you?" And he smiled again, and Elias rode home not knowing exactly what had been done to him, only that something had, and that the ground under the note had shifted while he watched. He told Della that night. He hadn't meant to. It was her homestead too now, on paper, and her risk. But more than that, he found he wanted to tell her, wanted the sense of her doing her own arithmetic on it beside him. She listened at the table, the way she listened, all of her still, and when he was done she said, "Any irregularity." A man doesn't say a thing like that unless he's already planning to find one. She looked at him. Or make one. And a cold understanding passed between them that they were up against something patient and unkind. But it wasn't all cold that fortnight. The rains were coming, and he'd promised her the roof, and a promise was a promise. So on the first gray, still day before the weather turned, he got up on her barn with a bundle of shingles and his father's hammer, and he found her leak, and he found 6 more she hadn't mentioned, and he worked the whole day up there in the wind while she handed shingles up the ladder and steadied it and called him a fool when he leaned too far. Somewhere in the afternoon he drove his thumb instead of the nail and swore a word he shouldn't have in front of a lady, and there was a silence, and then from below Della laughed. A real laugh, startled out of her, quick and bright and gone. He looked down at her over the eave with his thumb in his mouth, and she had her hand pressed to her lips like she could catch the laugh and put it back. And her eyes were bright, and he started laughing too, up on the roof, at nothing, at his own thumb, at the whole impossible arrangement of their lives. "You'll fall off my barn laughing," she said, "And then where's my roof?" "You'd finish it yourself," he said. "You finish everything yourself." "I do," she said. And the brightness in her face flickered, just a little, into something she didn't say. "Get back to work, Elias." It was the first time she'd said his given name unbent, not to argue, just to say it. Elias, he noticed it up on the roof and kept it. He said hers back before he thought. "Yes, Della," and they both went quiet and busy after that, him nailing, her steadying. But the ice was gone off the day, and they knew it, and neither one would be the one to say so. The coulee flooded 3 days after the rains came. He'd left a dozen head in the low pasture too long, gambling on the weather, and the weather turned on him hard, and the dry creek bed that had been stones for 2 summers came up in a night into a brown, roaring thing. He rode down at dawn and found his cattle bunched on a shrinking bar of mud with the water climbing, bawling, trapped, and one heifer already to her belly in it and sinking. He couldn't do it alone. He knew it, looking at it. And he turned to ride for a hand, and Della was already coming down the slope on her gray, in the coat and her husband's old boots, with a coil of rope on her saddle, because she'd seen the water rise from her kitchen window and known what it meant on his low ground before he had. They worked that flood together to the waist in cold brown water, roping and hauling and driving, 4 hands as one pair, no talk but the short hard words of the work. Hold him. Now. Again. Good. And it went on past all sense, until every last head was up the bank and shivering and safe, the trapped heifer last, the 2 of them heaving on the rope together in the current, with their boots slipping, until she came free of the sucking mud all at once, and they both went down in the shallows in a heap and came up soaked and gasping and, God help them, laughing again. He got his feet first and reached down and pulled her up, and for a moment they stood close in the running water, with their hands still gripped, both of them streaming, her hair plastered dark to her face, her chest going, her green eyes an arm's length from his and wide open with the wild of it. And the whole world narrowed to the small warm space between them in all that cold, and he felt her hand tighten in his, or thought he did, and he leaned. 1/2 an inch, without deciding to, and the heifer bawled and floundered up the bank, and the spell broke. And they let go, both at once, and stepped back, both at once, and turned to the cattle and did not look at each other for a good while after. That night the storm blew itself out. The sky cleared over the bench and the stars came out hard and cold, and the flood went down as fast as it had come, and by morning the coulee was only a creek again, humbled, running clear. Weather does that. It breaks, and it clears, and it leaves the world washed. Something in the 2 of them had broken and cleared the same way in that water, and they both knew it, and neither would say it, and the not saying was getting harder to keep up. It was the books that changed everything. She'd been keeping them since the wedding. Her Robert had taught her a fair hand and a sharp eye, and Elias's ledger had been a shambles of pencil stubs and guesses. She set it right over a week of evenings at the kitchen table, and Elias got in the habit of sitting across from her while she did it, mending harness or just being there in the lamplight, telling himself it was the warmth of the stove, and one night she went still over the note itself. The bank's own paper, the 840, that Crandall had made them sign at the courthouse. She'd read it twice when they signed it, the way she read everything. But she read it a 3rd time now, slow, her finger tracking a line at the bottom, in the small crabbed print under the signatures where a tired man doesn't look. "Elias," she said. Her voice had changed. "Bring the lamp closer." He brought it. She read the line again with the light full on it, and her mouth set into a hard, flat line he'd not seen on her before. "There's a clause," she said. "Down here in the small print, it says the holder may call the entire sum due at once, at his own discretion, upon an early call provision triggered by, and it lists them, late payment, sale of stock below a stated head, or," her finger stopped, "any change in the marital status of the borrowers." She looked up at him, and her face in the lamplight was pale and furious and certain. "Elias, this wasn't in the note your father signed. This is new." Crandall wrote this in. He wrote in a trap and made us sign it at the courthouse in front of the whole town while everybody was busy staring at the widow who bought a husband. Her hand had closed into a fist on the table. "Any change in your marital status? Elias, the day our note's paid and we sign that annulment. The day we go back to a wave over the fence, that's a change in marital status. He's built it so that the minute we dissolve this, he can call the whole thing due on the spot and take the ranch anyway." The lamp hissed. Outside, a coyote said one thing to the dark and stopped. Elias sat with the wrongness of it settling into him like the cold coming off the flood. Crandall had never meant to be paid. He'd meant to be paid and take the land both. The marriage that was supposed to save the ranch was the very hinge of the trap, and there was a thing in Della's face then that had nothing to do with clauses. Because she was looking at the note, and she was thinking about the annulment agreement folded in her drawer in the next room. The paper that would set her free and clear with her cash and her mended homestead and her name off the note, and she was understanding that to save this stubborn, proud man's father's land, the one thing they must never do was the very thing they'd both signed and promised each other to do at the end. They must never let it be over. She got up from the table without a word. Elias thought she'd gone to bed, or gone out to the cold to think. He sat with the terrible note. But she went into the small room that had been his father's, and she opened the drawer, and she took out the annulment agreement, the paper of their undoing, the clean escape they'd both signed the same day they married, so that neither would ever be trapped. She stood with it in her hand a long moment in the dark. She was not a woman who acted without her own arithmetic. She did the arithmetic now, all of it, the note and the trap and the sugar tin and the coat over her shoulders and the half-inch he'd leaned toward her in the flood and stepped back from, and she came out even. And for once in her life, the even answer and the wanted answer were the same, and it frightened her more than the flood had. She carried it to the kitchen stove. Elias didn't see her. His back was to her, his head in his hands over the note. She lifted the iron lid off the firebox, and the red light came up on her face, and she looked at the folded paper one last time. The door she'd been keeping open 2 years, the guarantee that she could always leave before she could be left, and she put it into the fire. She watched it catch. She watched their clean escape curl and blacken and go to nothing, and she felt the strangest lightness she had ever felt, standing there, alone in the choosing, telling no one, not even him, especially not him. Sham or no sham, paper or no paper. She had chosen this. She set the lid back on the stove soft so he wouldn't turn around, and the ashes of the way out went up the chimney into the cold, clear Montana dark. And in the next room, the note lay on the table with its small, crabbed trap, 10 lines of ink that could still take everything, and neither of them yet knew the half of who had really written them, or why, or what he already knew about a widow, a spring, and a deed recorded in her own name. Morning came the way mornings do out there, slow and gold, not caring what a person had burned in the night. Della was up before the light. She had the fire going and the coffee on, and her face put back the way she kept it, plain and steady, before Elias ever stirred. He came down and ate. He didn't know. That was the whole point of it. She poured his cup, and she watched his hands turn the note over on the table, and she said nothing about the drawer, or the stove, or the choosing. Some things a woman keeps for herself. It was a Thursday when August Merrow rode into the yard. He came on a tall bay with silver on the bridle, and he wore a town coat out to a homestead, which told you the man before he opened his mouth. Della was hanging wash. She saw him, and her hands went still on the line. Elias was at the corral. He set down the halter and walked over slow, the way you walk toward a thing you don't trust. "Mrs. Hale," Merrow said, and he tipped his hat, and he let the new name sit there a beat too long, like he was tasting how much it cost her. Or is it still Vance in your own heart? Hard to say, these arrangements. It's Hale, Della said. State your business, Mr. Marrow, he smiled. He had a rich man's smile, all ease, nothing behind it. The spring, he said. The one on the bench feeds both these dry little spreads, runs year-round, never quits, not even in a drought like this one. There isn't another like it for 40 miles. He looked at Elias. You know that, son. You've been watering your father's cattle off her generosity all summer. I know my water, Elias said. It's not your water. Marrow said it gentle, and that made it worse. It's hers. Recorded in her name, her late husband saw to that, and a smart man he was. Robert Vance knew what he was sitting on. He turned back to Della. I offered you a fair price for it once. Before all this, I'll better it now. Cash, enough you'd never turn another furrow the rest of your life. You could leave this valley and its whispers behind you. I remember your offer, Della said. I remember declining it. You were a widow alone then. Now you're, he glanced at Elias, and the glance was a knife wearing a smile, spoken for. So perhaps your husband has the sense you lacked. He faced Elias square. Here's the shape of it, Hale. You've got a note at my bank. $840, due at the fall roundup, and between us, you're not going to make it. Drought thinned your herd. Everybody in that lobby saw you come in a bachelor and go out with a borrowed wife. He let that land. Sign the spring over to me, and I'll see the note forgiven. The whole 840, gone. You keep your father's ground free and clear. All it costs you is a little water you don't even own. The yard went quiet. A meadowlark somewhere, the wash moving on the line. Elias looked at him a long moment. Then he understood the whole of it, all at once, the way a man understands weather. The bank, he said slowly. Your bank. I have an interest, Marrow allowed. Crandall works for you. It wasn't a question. The policy, the married man on the note. All of it. You made the door too narrow to walk through unless I married her, and you knew she had the water, and you knew. He stopped. His jaw worked. You bet I'd fail. You've been waiting on it. Marrow only shrugged, and the shrug was the confession, and he wasn't ashamed of it one bit. Business, Mr. Hale. It's all business. Even your marriage. Especially your marriage. He gathered his reins. Think on my offer. You've got sense enough to take it. She's got sense enough to make you. He tipped his hat to Della one last time. Ma'am. He rode out. They stood in the yard, and neither spoke until the dust of him was gone off toward the road. I didn't know he was the bank, Della said finally. Her voice was low. Robert never. I never put it together. That the man who wanted my spring and the man who holds your note were the same reach. I believe you, Elias said. And he did, but something had gone tight in him all the same, some old wariness waking up, and she saw it, and she didn't have a name for it yet. That was the same week Thomas Ackley came calling. Ackley was the opposite of Marrow in every way that counted. He ran the biggest sound spread on the far side of the creek, and he'd built it honest, and he was a widower himself. Quiet. Decent. The kind of man mothers pointed at. He came in the afternoon while Elias was out mending the north fence. He came to see Della, and he was too honest to pretend otherwise. I'll say it plain, Della, because you're a plain-spoken woman, and I respect that. He turned his hat in his hands on the porch. This thing you're in with Hale, the whole valley knows what it is. A paper made at the bank. I'm not here to speak ill of the man. But when it's done, when that note's cleared and the paper's torn up, he didn't know it was ash. Nobody did. You'll be a widow again, in the world's eyes, only with more whispers than before. And you'd take the whispers off me, Della said. I'd take you to a house that's paid for, Ackley said. No bank, no note, no barons sniffing at your water because you'd not need to sell it and I'd not let anyone near it. You'd want for nothing the rest of your days. I'm not a romantic man, Della. I can't stand on your porch and promise you fire. But I can promise you safe. And I think at our age safe is worth more than most folks let on. It was. Della thought. It surely was. He was right about all of it. He was the sensible answer, the even answer, the one that cost nothing and risked nothing. He was everything the smart thing looked like. You're a good man, Thomas, she said. The best in this valley, and I'll say so to anyone. But, he said, but I've made my choosing. She hadn't meant to say it. It came out of the burned place in her, the stove place, the thing she'd told no one. I made it already. It's done. It doesn't make sense and I can't explain it to you, and it may cost me everything. But it's made. Ackley looked at her a long moment. He was too decent to argue with a thing like that. He put his hat back on. He's a lucky man, he said, and I hope to God he knows it. And he went. And he never spoke a hard word of it again. Which is its own kind of love. The kind that steps back. Now here is the thing about a spring that runs year-round in a dry country. It is not water. It is life, and money, and power, and every rancher on the bench lived or died by it, and Merrow meant to have it, and the only wall between him and it was 10 lines of ink in a county ledger with the name Della Vance on them. And Della knew it. She'd known it since the yard, since Merrow's smile. She brought it to Elias herself. It was her idea, freely given, and that mattered later more than either of them could have guessed. He'll never stop, she said. They were at the kitchen table by lamp. As long as that spring stands in one name, he'll keep coming at it. Buy it, or squeeze it, or wait for one of us to weaken. But if it stood in 2 names, she turned the iron ring on her finger, the plain one, his mother's. If it stood in yours and mine both, joint, true partners, then he can't buy it off one of us. He can't split us off it. He'd have to move us both. And he can't move me, and I don't believe he can move you. That water's yours, Elias said. Robert left it to you. I've no right to half of it. You've got every right the day you married me, she said. That's what married means, Elias. Whatever the reason it started. She held his eyes. Let me put you on that deed. Not for the bank. For the valley. For us. For us. She'd said it before she caught it. She looked down. So they rode to the land office, 40 miles, and they filed the deed to the bench spring in both their names, joint and equal, true partners in the water that everyone from here to the mountains wanted. Della's own idea. Della's own gift. And on the ride home, the first frost was coming. You could smell it, iron in the air, and they stopped at her gate in the last of the light. And something happened that had been trying to happen for weeks. He was helping her down off the wagon. His hands were at her waist. And she came down slow, and they were close enough she could see the gray coming in at his temples and the sun lines by his eyes, and neither of them moved for a breath. And then another, and the whole thing tilted toward the half-inch, the same half-inch as the flood. And he stepped back. It's business, Della. He said it rough, like it hurt his throat. This, all of it. It's business. Best we both remember that. She looked at him. She did not let her face do anything. She had 31 years of practice at not letting her face do anything. Of course, she said. Business. And she went inside, and she stood with her back against the door, and she pressed the iron ring hard against her mouth. And she did not cry, because she was not a woman who cried, but it was a near thing that night. It was a very near thing. He guarded his heart because a guarded thing can't be taken. She had learned the same lesson at the same school, and there they were, 2 people who'd both burned their exits, standing on either side of a door, each certain they were the only one who felt the cold. It broke the way these things break. All at once. Merrow came back. but not to the yard this time. He came to town, to the mercantile porch, where men gather and talk carries, and he was waiting for Elias to come in for feed. And he had an audience, which is how a cruel man likes it, and he opened Elias up in front of them, slow, like a man peeling fruit. "Have you thanked her yet?" Merrow asked. "Pleasant, your bride. Have you thanked her proper?" "For what?" Elias said. "For saving your ranch." Merrow smiled around at the men. "You don't even know, do you? It was never you that saved that spread, Hale. It was never your work, or your father's name, or your 40-mile ride with a watch to pawn. It was her water. That spring is the only thing on either of your properties worth $1 in a drought, and it's hers, and the day she married you it started sheltering under your name. Safe from me. Safe from the bank." He leaned in. "She's a clever woman, your widow. Cleverer than you. She was alone and exposed, and I was closing on that water. And then along you came, broke and desperate and easy, and she married her spring into your name where I couldn't reach it. She used you, son, exactly the way you used her, only she was better at it. And the terrible thing, the thing that made it stick, was that it fit. Every piece of it fit. The way she'd pushed the joint deed. The way she'd said for us. She knew about Merrow. She'd known all along the water was the prize. And Elias, who had built his whole life on the idea that being needed was the same as being used, who guarded his heart precisely so this could not happen, Elias believed it. Not because it was true, because it was the thing he'd always been most afraid was true. He rode home hard. And Crandall's rider passed him on the road going the other way, and Elias didn't know it yet, but that rider had just tacked a paper to his own door. Because the same morning, the very same morning, Rufus Crandall had called the note. Early, in full, on a manufactured irregularity buried in the small print, a change in marital status, the clause Della had found by lamplight, the trap inside the trap. $840, due now, in 10 days, or the bank takes the ranch. Merrow and Crandall, one hand, they'd sprung it clean. But Elias didn't even see the paper on the door. He came in white and shaking with the other thing, the Merrow thing, and Della was at the stove, and she turned, and she saw his face and she knew something had broken, but she didn't know what. "You used me," he said. She went still. "Elias." "The water. It was always the water. Merrow told me. You married your spring into my name to keep it from him. All of it. The books, the joint deed. For us," his voice cracked on it, "all of it was you moving your one asset where the Baron couldn't reach it. And I was the fool you moved it through. I was the door. Same as I made you the wife on my note, you made me the name on your deed. We're square, Della, we're even. Isn't that what you'll say? You always come out even." And that was the cruelest of it, throwing her own arithmetic back at her, and he saw it land and he was too hurt to be sorry. Della did not weep. Understand that. She stood at the stove, where 2 months back she had burned their only way out and told no one, and thought it the bravest thing she'd ever done. And she looked at the man she'd burned it for, and she heard him call her a schemer to her face, and something in her went very quiet and very cold and very far away. "I see," she said. "Della, no, you've said it. You've thought it a long time, I expect. It's easier for you, thinking it. A woman who used you can't hurt you. Only a woman who," she stopped. She would not give him that word. Not now, not ever. If he could believe this of her. "I'll go home. To my homestead. The note's yours, the ranch is yours, and the spring," she pulled the iron ring off her finger, his mother's plain iron band, and she set it on the kitchen table beside the note. Soft. The way she'd set the stove lid so he wouldn't turn around, the spring's in both names still. "I won't take it from you. That much I'll not undo, whatever you think of me. Water's water." And she walked out. She did not slam the door. She was not a door-slamming woman. She walked the fence line back to her own dark house, and the frost came down on the whole valley that night, hard and white and final, and the iron ring lay on the table by the note like the ash of something, and Elias sat alone with both. He found the foreclosure paper the next morning, nailed to his own front door, and it should have been the worst thing, and somehow it was barely anything at all, next to the empty chair, and the ring on the table, and the sugar tin she'd kept full for him, without ever once being asked. Ackley found him 3 days into it. Elias hadn't shaved. The place had gone quiet in that particular way a place goes quiet when the person who made it a home has left it a house. "You're a damned fool," Ackley said from the doorway. He wasn't a man who cursed. He cursed now. Come to gloat. Come to tell you what the whole valley can see, and you can't. Ackley stepped in. He didn't sit. That woman filed the water in your name before you ever thanked her once, before you'd earned a drop of it. You know what she could have done, Elias, if she was the schemer Merrow painted? She could have sold that spring to him for enough to live like a queen and let your ranch go under and married a safe man across the creek. His jaw tightened. She had that offer. Both those offers. I made her one myself, and I'm not ashamed to say it. A paid house. No bank. No baron. Safe the rest of her days. He let it sit. She turned me down. Said her choosing was made and it didn't make sense, and it might cost her everything. Those were her words. Might cost her everything. He looked at Elias hard. Does that sound like a woman who used you, or a woman who bet everything she had on a man too scared to see it? Elias sat very still. Merrow needed you to believe she was the schemer, Ackley said, quieter now, because as long as you two stood together on that deed, he couldn't touch the water. Split you, and he can pick you off one at a time. He didn't tell you a truth, Elias. He handed you the one lie you were already primed to swallow. He put his hat on. The bank takes it all Thursday. 10 in the morning. Same lobby you walked into with your father's watch. You've got till then to figure out whether you're your father's son or just a scared man who let the best thing in this valley walk home in the frost. And he left. Elias sat there a long time. Then he got up, and he picked up the note, and he picked up the iron ring, and he went and got Della's ledger, the one she'd kept in her clean, careful hand, the one where she'd found the buried clause and written it out plain with the date and the page and the wording of it, all the proof a person would need, laid out by a woman who kept books the way other people kept promises. And he read it all through by lamp, the way she must have read it, the night she found the trap. And somewhere in the reading, he stopped being a scared man. Thursday, 10 in the morning. The Territorial Stockmen's Bank. The same 8 ranchers were in the lobby, or men like them, the Valley's men, because word had gone round that the bank was taking the Hale place and a foreclosure draws a crowd the way a hanging does. Crandall was at his desk with the papers squared in front of him, and that same policy smile on his face, the one he'd worn when he stamped a man's file single and decline. And August Merrow stood by the window in his town coat, come to watch his water fall into his hand at last, patient as a man who has never once lost. Elias walked in. He had shaved. He had his father's silver watch in his vest, and it stayed there. He didn't come to pawn anything today. "Mr. Hale," Crandall said, "pleasant. You're prompt. The bank appreciates prompt. Now, the note has been called under the provisions you signed to, and I'm afraid the sum is due in full this morning, $840, and lacking that, the property reverts, under which provision," Elias said. Crandall paused. "I beg you said the provisions I signed to. Which one calls the note early?" Elias set the ledger on the desk. He set the note beside it. "Read it out. To these men. The clause you're standing on. Read it out loud." "That's hardly." "Read it, Rufus." A different voice. "The land agent, come up from the county office at Elias's asking, a spare gray man with no stake in Sweetgrass Bend and no reason to love a bank. The man's asking to hear the terms read in the open. That's his right, and I'll hear them too. Crandall's smile stayed, but it stopped reaching his eyes. He read it. Fast, low, the clause about a change in the borrower's marital status, permitting the holder to call the full sum immediate and due. Louder, said the land agent. He read it again. And the lobby heard it, and the ranchers looked at each other, because every married man in that room had signed a note in his life, and not one of them had ever signed that. Now, Elias said, I'd like it noted that this clause is in a hand different from the rest of the instrument. My wife keeps my books. She found it. She wrote it up. Here. He opened the ledger to the page. The date, the page, the wording. In a fair, clean hand any court could read. That clause was slipped into a standard note after the fact, to make marriage the very thing that could call the debt. Marry, and the bank lends. Marry, and the same marriage lets the bank foreclose whenever it likes, a door that locks behind you. He looked at Crandall. Who wrote it, Rufus? The instrument speaks for, who's the bank's silent partner? Elias turned, and he looked at Merrow by the window. Because a man came to my yard 2 weeks past and offered to forgive this whole note if I'd sign my wife's spring over to him. This note. That the bank swears is a matter of impartial policy. Forgiven, personal, by that man there, in trade for water. He let it land on the room. You can't both be true. Either it's the bank's honest policy, or it's that man's private lever to take a widow's spring. It isn't both. And these men can see it isn't both. Merrow pushed off the window. He was still smiling, but it had gone thin. This is a foolish performance, Hale. You owe the money. Pay it or don't. The bench spring, Elias said, is deeded joint. Both our names. Filed at the land office 3 weeks back, before any of this, before your note was called. You can check it, agent. It's on the county book. The land agent nodded slowly. He'd already checked. So there's no widow alone to squeeze anymore. There's a marriage and a joint deed, and you can't buy half of a thing off one owner. You'd have to move us both off it, and we don't move. Elias's voice dropped. You wanted her water so bad, Merrow, you built a whole bank policy to trap a man into a marriage that'd hand it to you. You overthought it. You gave her the one thing she was missing. You gave her a husband. And a married woman's water isn't for sale. The land agent straightened. He took the note off the desk, and he took the ledger, and he looked at the clause, and he looked at the hand it was written in, and he said, in that dry county voice, this early call provision is void. It's a material alteration inserted after execution, and I'll be opening an inquiry into this note and this office both. He set the papers down. There's no foreclosure today. And Mr. Crandall, you'll want a lawyer, because the thing that trapped this man is about to be the thing that traps you. Your own policy. Your own ink. And the smile went off Rufus Crandall's face at last, all of it, gone, and he sat there in the ruin of his own small cleverness, a man hoisted on the exact rope he'd tied. Merrow made for the door. He'd lost, and he knew it, and rich men don't like to be watched losing. And the door opened before he reached it, and Della was standing in it. She'd come to town. She'd heard the bank was taking the Hale place Thursday at 10, and whatever he'd called her, whatever he believed, she could not sit at her homestead and let his father's ranch go without standing in the room. That was who she was. That was the whole trouble with her. Merrow stopped in front of her. He looked at her a long moment, and some of the old smoothness came back, and he said, "Lo, so it was almost private. You could have been comfortable. Della, I offered you the world for that water." And Della looked at him, plain and steady 31 years old, and done being anybody's asset. And she said the driest thing anyone in that lobby ever heard. You wanted the water. August, you should have wanted the woman. And she stepped aside and let him pass, and he went, and the door shut on him, and that was the end of August Merrow in Sweetgrass Bend. Then it was just the room, and the witnesses, and the two of them. Elias came around the desk. He had the iron ring in his hand, his mother's plain iron band, the one she'd left on the kitchen table beside the note the night the frost came. He crossed the lobby to where she stood, in front of the same 8 men who had watched a widow buy a husband and a rancher sell himself, who had whispered sham, who were not whispering now. I said a cruel thing to you, Elias said. In my own kitchen. I said you used me. His voice was rough, but he didn't hide from it. A man told me a lie I was already carrying, and I was so busy guarding my heart against being used that I couldn't see a woman had gone and filed her whole fortune under my name before I'd ever earned a nickel of it. You saved my father's ranch, Della, not with the water. He stopped, and he made himself say it in front of all of them, the contained thing, the whole thing, with choosing me. When you didn't have to. When a safer man across the creek offered you a paid house and no whispers, you chose the broke fool with the trap on his note. And I called you a schemer for it. The lobby was dead silent. He held out the ring. This was my mother's. It's plain iron. It never was worth $1, and it never will be. I gave it to you at that courthouse as a piece of a transaction, and I'm ashamed of that now, because you deserved better than a business proposition from the first hour. He swallowed. I'm not offering you business. Not this time. I'm offering you the rest of my life, out loud, in front of every man who called it a sham. He said it. Stay, Della, not on paper. Ours, and Della Vance, who did not weep, who had 31 years of practice at not letting her face do anything. Let her face do something at last. She didn't answer with words. She'd been valued for her words and her hands and her water her whole life, and never once for the woman inside all of it, and words weren't the coin that mattered here. She reached out, and she took the iron ring out of his palm. And she didn't hand it back to be put on. She turned to the desk, and she took up the land agent's pen, and she put her name to the note beside Elias's, in her own clean hand, not because a bank policy required a married woman's signature, but because she chose to stand on that debt beside him, of her own free will, her arithmetic, and her wanting finally the same. Then, she slid the ring back onto her own finger herself. And she looked up at him, and she said the only word she needed. Ours. He kissed her. In the lobby of the Territorial Stockmen's Bank, in front of the 8 men who'd come to watch a foreclosure and got a wedding instead, the first real kiss either of them had had in longer than they'd say, and the men took their hats off, and old Ackley by the door, who'd loved her too and lost her clean, put his hat over his heart, and then set it back on his head, and tipped it once to the both of them, and walked out into the cold, bright morning, a good man honoring a costly thing. The whispering town was the witnessing town now. That's the way it turns, sometimes, if you're lucky, and if 2 pairs of hands hold on. A year on, it looked like this. The 2 homesteads ran as one place now, the fence between them a thing you crossed without thinking, and the bench spring flowed clean and cold down to water both, and past both, to every dry spread on the bench, because Della wouldn't hoard water any more than she'd hoard anything. And the valley knew it, and the valley loved her for it at last. The note was paid. In full, $840, every cent, earned back out of a herd that fattened on year-round water through a second dry summer that killed lesser outfits. The receipt was nailed by the kitchen door where a person could see it coming in, not to brag, just to remember. The foreclosure paper Crandall had tacked to that same door was long burned, and so was another paper, older, That only Della knew about, gone to ash up the chimney into the Montana dark 2 winters back. And she'd never told him, and one quiet night by the lamp she finally did, about the annulment and the stove and the choosing she made alone before he'd earned it, and he sat there a long moment, and then he took her hand and didn't say anything at all. Because some things are too big for words, and he'd learned that lesson finally, the hard way, the only way. Rufus Crandall didn't work at the bank anymore. The inquiry saw to that. His own claws, his own ink, the small crabbed trap he'd built for another man, closed on him instead, which is the kind of justice that's rare enough that people still tell it in Sweetgrass Bend. The kitchen window was lit against the dark most evenings, and the table was set for 2, and the sugar tin on the shelf was full. Kept full, always, by a man who'd learned that a woman takes her tea bitter because sugar's dear, and that the fixing of small things is how you say the big ones. The father's silver watch ticked on the mantel now. Home for good. Never pawned, and the plain iron ring stayed on Della's hand, worn smooth now. 4 times it had changed its meaning, and it had come at last to mean the only thing that lasts. There's a new clerk at the Territorial Stockmen's Bank these days. Young fellow, eager, doesn't know the valley's history yet. Elias came in this spring to take a small loan for a new barn. And the young clerk had his forms and his questions, and he got to one and looked up and asked, the way they're trained to ask, and this note, "Will it be under a married man's name, sir?" And Elias Hale, 35 years old now, his father's land free and clear beneath him and his wife's water running through it, and her name beside his on everything that mattered. Thought about a 40-mile ride with a watch to pawn, and a policy that only lent to a married man, and all the long, strange road from there to here. Under 2, he said. Some things a bank can hold as collateral, land and cattle and water and gold, and some things it can't and never could, and those are the only things that were ever worth a damn. If you've got a story like this in your own family from your own town, tell me where you're watching from down in the comments. I'd like to know what valley you're in.